Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Okay, so Bobby, let's start by asking you to give us a short profile about yourself.
Well, I was born in Leicester, went to school here, educated here. I studied in Leicester and went into business until last 25 years. But then I had a kind of a hobby, and the hobby was on the culture and history of the Sikh Empire. So I mean, the 1970s was a period where there was a lot of racism in Leicester, and I remember growing up, going to school every day, and I used to always get involved in a fight, because there would be always people where we used to live. There were a lot of racist gangs and boys in that area, and we were probably the few Sikh families, probably the only Sikh family living in that street. It was a very, very, very uncomfortable period, the late 70s, growing up in Leicester, and to kind of look at it, when we look back at it, I'm glad that society has changed since the 70s, honestly.
But I've always thought that in Leicester there's been a large Gujarati community living here.
There is a very large Gujarati community, but if we look at 70s and 80s, it was a period where, if you remember the riots in the early 90s in London, in Liverpool, Manchester, and Leicester was completely gripped with that, where shops were all kind of shut up, boards were set up on the main street. The whole shops were all closed off, and all the businesses that the Gujaratis were running in Belgrave Road were kind of completely closed for about a week or two. And those days of growing up and seeing that, and to see it to this day, where our Leicester, in particular in the Midlands, has become a multicultural city. People from all over the world come here to celebrate Diwali. They say to me that outside India, if you want to see Diwali, then Leicester is the place to be. So that shows you how far we've come.
Right. So going to your school days, I mean, were you always interested in history?
No. I knew nothing about history. I knew nothing about Sikh history. I remember when my dad used to write letters back to India, he would put on his letters, so and so and so, Fagwara, East Punjab, India. And I would ask him, what do you want East Punjab for? Tenu nahi pata, ek ਹੋਰ ਵੀ Punjab ਹੈਗਾ ya. I go, what's all that about? Can I explain to you one day? I didn't know there was two Punjabs. And so I knew nothing about it. Only in my later years, after I left school, when a friend of mine had given me this kind of simple book. He goes, read this, it'll interest you. And what was on the back of that page was a page on Maharaja Ranjit Singh, a black and white picture, and another page, Duleep Singh. I thought, yeah, what's all this about? So I started reading, and that's when it just started from there.
So you were fascinated by Ranjit Singh?
I mean, I'm going now back to the late 80s now. And before that, I knew nothing about the history of India, the partition period, where were Sikhs from, Chandigarh was a joint capital, etc. I knew nothing about, I think 1984 was a turning point, if I was to go back. I think 1984 was a crucial period for a lot of boys of my age whose eyes were opened in what was Sikhi all about. And that's when you started going to the libraries, picking out the books and reading about partition and the Sikh causes and Sikh grievances. I think so. I think for that, although it was probably the darkest periods in my life to see in 1984, but that was, I think for me, a turning point. And that's when we got more interested.
Right, and since then, since 84, you've been basically going to Pakistan numerous times, I assume, to do your history.
I've been, the first time when my friend gave me this book, I called my friend up in Leicester. I goes, did you know we had a Sikh empire? He goes, no. I goes, have you heard of Duleep Singh? He goes, no. I goes, he's buried in England. I goes, we need to get to Lahore. And within 3 months of getting that book, in 1989, I remember the date, 11th of April, I was crossing the border from India to Pakistan. I was barely aged 18. And nobody had accompanied me. I was on my own. And I got to Lahore. And the first place when I saw the fort of Ranjit Singh, that was the period that the addiction started. I just couldn't get enough of it.
Really?
Yeah, that fortress, the palace of Ranjit Singh, when I first saw it in 1989, I thought, wow, is this our history? And when I got back, I read more books, and I started getting more inquisitive.
Okay, so let's talk about your first book. Now, and I say the first because I hope there's going to be many of this, but this one, The Lion's Farangis.
Yes.
What made you pick that particular title, and explain something about this picture? Why did you decide to have this picture on the front page?
You know, there's many books written on Sikh history. There's hundreds and thousands of books written on the Sikh Empire, on the Gurus, on the Gurdwaras. This was a hobby for me. And someone has said to, I think my wife suggested, look, what are you going to do with all this knowledge? Why don't you share it? I goes, how? She goes, why don't you just write a book? I goes, I'm not a writer. She goes, so is half of London not writers? Why don't you write a book on it? So I wanted to do something that had not been written. And so I sat down once and I said, right, what can I write about that would generally interest the ordinary reader? Because there's books out there. Why would someone buy my book in the end? So I discovered that there wasn't much written on the Ranjit Singh's mercenaries. There was one or two books had written on the French presence in the Punjab in the 1830s, but nothing on the Italians, nothing on the Dutch, the Spanish, the Americans, the Irish. So I was in business at that time, and I took some time off, and I started researching in Europe in the archives. So I was traveling to Italy, to Spain at the archives, going to the libraries, just to obtain material, because I wanted fresh material, fresh images, never been published, to make a unique book. And so that set me up. In 2007 I went over across. Then I wanted to meet the families. The idea came about when I thought, hang on, what's happened to all these generals that we read in the history books? This general, that general. Ranjit Singh got them married off, they had children. What happened to them when the empire crumbled, when the British took over? They all returned to Europe. So I was inquisitive. Were there any descendants alive to this day? So that set me up.
So the word Ferengi, although I'm a Star Trek fan and I can remember the word Ferengi in one of the episodes, but I mean that's a bit of a slang word, isn't it?
Well, it was a derogatory word used, but back in the 19th century, it was just a normal word that was used, and the British used it. It was the British that actually introduced it in India. And it was used constantly in the daily records of the Darbar. So, for instance, it would be Alad Saab Ferengi, James Saab Ferengi. The Ferengi word was attached to all the foreigners. So it wasn't derogatory at that period. Later, it became quite, derogatory in the 20th century, 21st century.
Tiga, so the people that you've covered here are probably, his generals that had moved over from, because of the Napoleon days were coming to an end, or what? Why did these people suddenly come to Punjab?
A quick summary. By the 1820s, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had conquered most of the territories in Punjab. But he knew that on the other side of the Satluj River was the mighty, the superior East India Company. And one day he suspected that he would have to go to war with them. And by a stroke of luck, 1822, 2 Europeans arrived on his frontier on the Afghan-Punjab border. And these were 2 French officers who had crossed over from Europe into Persia seeking employment, because when Napoleon was defeated in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo, no French officer could find any work in Europe. So most of the Europeans, the French in particular, started drifting to other parts of the empire, to the Egyptian Empire, to the Ottoman Empire, to the Persian Empire. But some of them ended up in the Punjab, because the Punjab by 1820 was the only province that was independent in India. And Ranjit Singh, as a stroke of luck, took these 2 men on and simply said, can you train and modernize my army to European standards? And so this was a beautiful relationship that was forged between these French officers and Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And by 1827, the Sikh army, 75,000 strong, had been completely modernized to European standards, much to the fear of the British in Calcutta, who now considered Punjab to be a superior power to theirs.
So in the book, you cover most of the generals, I assume,
Yes.
that were in the Darbar at the time.
Yes.
But this particular picture that you've got on your front cover is a bit different than the Darbar picture that I've seen in your front room. So can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the picture that we see on the wall there, that's Ranjit Singh in his Darbar in the 1820s. This picture that what I used on the book, this was an original painting, an oil painting that a Hungarian artist who visited Punjab during the reign of Maharaja Sher Singh in 1831, August Sheft. He was bedazzled by what he saw in Punjab. And he said, look, if I was to paint individually everyone here, or the chiefs, or the princes, he'll need 4 or 5 years. So what he did, he painted one huge painting of the Darbar of Ranjit Singh in 1841, and he depicted all the princes, all the soldiers, all the foreigners in this huge painting, which is 17 foot long, 12 foot high, which today sits in the Sikh Museum at the Lahore Fort in Pakistan.
So were they all present, or did he actually make them up?
No, he sketched some of them,
Right.
but the painting was actually completed in Vienna. So what he did when he was in Lahore, because he sketched a lot of the officers by hand, took all the sketches back to Europe in Vienna, and he had completed a painting in Vienna, which was shown in 1855 at the exhibition.
So why didn't he leave it in Vienna? Did he hand it back to somebody in Lahore?
No, it was given to Maharaja Leap Singh's possession, and it was his painting that was actually he took at the end.
No, that's fascinating. Are you planning to do any other books? I mean, this is a historical book, really, in many ways, the research you've done. Are you looking to do something more with the families?
Yes. There's another, I'm in constant touch with the families, but I'm actually just finished a new book off titled Remnants of the Sikh Empire, which is basically, I've catalogued all the palaces, the forts, the mansions built by all the powerful Sikh chiefs of Ranjit Singh, which have since 1830s to this present day are scattered throughout the Punjab of Pakistan to the Afghan border, which we know nothing about, and most of these monuments are crumbling. So before they completely are destroyed or collapse, I wanted to really, because I've seen some monuments last year which don't exist this year. They've just been bulldozed and a shopping plaza has been built on top. So I thought it's imperative that we catalogue these monuments, because this is our history. And so in 50 years' time, when someone goes to Pakistan, hang on, where's all these palaces gone? There's a book there, and say, hang on, I know what it looked like.
But are the Pakistani or Punjab part of it not looking after them at all then?
You know what, they are looking after the main monuments, but there are so many monuments out in the far-flung remote areas of Pakistan where the ordinary person cannot go. Deir Ismail Khan, the tribal areas, there are 8 forts that General Hari Singh Nalwa had built, but nobody knows about, and these have been used by the Pakistani army.
Okay.
So I've kind of catalogued all that for the new.
That's your second book?
That's my new book, which should be out hopefully next summer.
Okay. Let me move on to about some of the films that you've done. Especially you've done one on Sikhs of Kabul in 2012,
Yeah.
and we've already aired that on the Sikh channel. And I think people were fascinated just that somebody had gone to Kabul and done that. And then you've done a recent one, which we haven't shown yet, but we will in the coming months, and it's about Sikhs in Burma.
That's right.
So do you pick certain areas to go and make a movie about Sikhs that are living in that area?
Yes, I do. I like to pick something that's not been done before. Like with the book, it was a new subject. Same thing here. We know about the Sikhs in Canada, we know about the Sikhs in Australia and Singapore. But what do we know about the Sikhs in Afghanistan or in Iran or in Japan? So Afghanistan was a subject that came up simply because there was a report on CNN, and it showed about the minorities suffering in Kabul. And for 10 seconds they showed a Sikh And I think, hang on, that needs to be investigated. So when I made certain inquiries with the Afghan Sikhs in London, they knew nothing. They had no information to give me. So I thought, hang on, I just have to go out to Afghanistan and meet the Sikh community and their plight, see how they're struggling, why are they struggling, why isn't there any scope for them, how come they are left behind, and how come all the Afghan Sikhs are in Delhi or in Southall. So that was a very, very project dear to my heart, which was shown around about 15 film festivals around the world. It was shown at the Mexico Film Festival, where I was given a diploma. It was shown in New York, LA, Canada, Iceland, Qatar. So, and it touched a very raw nerve with a lot of people. It wasn't just a Sikh issue. It was an issue about minorities and why they are struggling. And here was a community in Afghanistan that had been there for centuries, 400 years, from 300,000 Sikhs prior to 1992 to barely 2,000 in the whole of the country. Why are they fleeing? So I did this documentary simply to highlight their awareness of the plight of the Sikhs.
So I know recently there was the incident of one of the Afghan men that was who passed away coming over in a tanker, yes. And we showed your movie again. That's right. And it was quite moving, I think, yes. Even for the Afghan community. And Sikh Channel did record the funeral of that particular gentleman. We went down to the Afghan Gurdwara. But you're right, I don't know why they've shifted, and we didn't want to lose that. So I think that for us on the channel, that was a really good documentary. But why did you pick then Burma?
Because Burma, because as you know, it's the 100th anniversary of World War One. Sikhs had fought in World War Two. Over 80,000 turban Sikhs fought in World War Two. And Burma, because I was actually I wanted to do a documentary of the Sikhs in South America. But a friend of mine who had been to Burma recently said, look, Bobby, forget Argentina and Brazil. Why don't you just go to Burma? It's a fascinating country. And Burma had been, isolated from the rest of the world. We knew nothing about Burma. And that kind of intrigued me. And I knew about the Sikhs being in Burma. So I thought, hang on, that would make another subject, a fantastic subject, as a follow-up to Afghanistan. To go out to Burma and to meet the Sikh community, which I know nothing about. I do not know any Sikhs who have come from Burma.
No, there are probably no Sikhs in the UK that are from Burma.
Yes. There's no community of the Burmese Sikhs in London, so it was I think, ideal around that time to visit Burma because it was opening up to tourism, and the government had relaxed visa. The movement and the freedom of moving around Burma was relaxed, so I thought it was an ideal time to visit Burma now, before it was the influx of tourism started coming in, the hotels were skyrocketing and everything.
So how did you find the people in Burma, the Sikhs living there?
I tell you one thing, I was completely shocked to see Burma, a country that I thought would be just like India or Bangladesh, but it was so clean, it was so modernized. There was discipline on the roads. There's hardly scooters are banned, rickshaws are banned in the capital. Nobody can spit, nobody can eat while you're walking. It was so organized. And on top of that, to see the Sikhs, in comparison with the Sikhs in Afghanistan who are struggling, here the Sikhs are a huge success, all in business. Very proud of their heritage and of being Burmese Sikhs with their Chinese look.
I was going to ask you that. When I visited Sikhs around the world, and I remember going to Malaysia, the Sikhs begin to look like the people. I don't know whether it's due to intermarriage.
Yes, it is.
Right. So is that happening in Burma as
well? There's a lot of... The Sikhs are very well respected in Burma. If you're in a queue, and this is no lie, if you're in a queue, you're asked to come to the front. Mr. Singh, come to the front.
I assume you've got to be wearing a turban.
Obviously. You have to be. I mean, I was walking around filming and I was given so much respect. Come on, have a tea, a cup of tea, come have lunch with us. And we're busy filming around the city. And then to meet the Sikh community there, you will not see a clean-shaven Sikh in Burma. It does not exist. These are the people that we need to give credit to. They have kept the Sikh identity flowing and it's flourishing.
I mean, the Afghan community have done the same in Kabul as well.
And Iran.
Yes, I think that's...
So I commend them of maintaining that identity.
I want to ask you something else regarding certain artifacts that are here in the UK that I see historians, I'm not saying like you, but other historians saying, gee, the Kohinoor Maharaja Dalip Singh, the Jari Samadhya or his bones we want to bring back to India. What do you think about those people that make those sort of comments?
I think, it's very controversial. We all have, my view is simple. I think regarding the Kohinoor you mentioned, I think it's a very debatable subject. Yes, it does belong to the Sikhs, but I think it's safe in London. And the question is, who has the right to return it to India? Where would you put it in one thing? And the other matter is that wasn't Ranjit Singh the Maharaja of Lahore? His capital was Lahore. Say if the Pakistan government today say, hang on, he was the Maharaja of Lahore. Lahore's in Pakistan. It should be displayed in the fort or in his palace in Lahore. So they have an equal claim. It's not just the Sikhs who are the legal claimants to the Kohinoor. I think that the Punjabi Muslims in Pakistan was, hang on, Sada Maharaja si, itthe rakho. What do you do? And with the body of Dalip Singh, I think that I think is a bit extreme, because if you were to exhume his body and reinter it in Punjab, in Amritsar, but he was born in Lahore, same question applies.
So you're not in favour of taking Sikh artifacts, well, it's not artifacts, but some of their belongings back to whether it's Pakistan or India?
Well, I'm not in favour of that, because I think they're more safe here. I think if you return anything to Punjab, I think you'll get stolen, and they don't have the kind of the place where they can install these places safely. Has the V&A is very secure and everything. Where would we put in the Golden Temple? There's no museum in Punjab that we can say that this is a museum, a very professional museum, that we have museums in Britain. They're not very, they have no air conditioning, no temperature control, nothing. So I think they're safer in London and a bit closer to us as well.
I mean, you've got a number of, I don't know whether artifacts is the right word, but I know you've got maps and you've got paintings and you've got little kirpana, all sorts of things that you collect.
Yeah.
So how big is your personal collection?
Not very, I'm not a big collector, but there's always the odd few items that kind of I get interested in. And I like to collect a few things here and there. I mean, my best collection is the original Anglo-Sikh maps that I found in Ireland, which I actually purchased from the buyer personally, and it was something that I said, look, this is my history. I can't let these go. And I just stumbled across these maps in Ireland when I was researching for my new book, and the owner, who was in France, was very happy to sell them to me. And these are battle plans of Chilianwala, of Sobrama, of Gujarat, and these are the personal maps of General Gough, who was the commander-in-chief of the British Army.
So do you display your the things that you've collected?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I'm hoping if we can set up an international museum, I would be happy to loan them and to have them displayed in a museum where all Sikh artifacts, like a central museum that's specially built, where we can have everything displayed in one museum, where all these collectors in London or in America can say, hang on, there's one museum, let's put it all in there and let's have it displayed there.
Okay, I mean, you left a very good job to start doing all this work, and what would you say to youngsters who want to start to do this? I mean, I assume there's not much money to be made.
No, look, if you want to make money, get yourself a good job. But if you've got passion, and if you are really, really attached to your culture and heritage, and it's an expensive hobby, by the way, and I gave up my work for this, but I love this job, what I'm doing. I can't get enough of it. And I'm fortunate that I get sponsors here and there, and it funds my way to my projects. But for youngsters, I say, look, follow your dream, follow your heart, and do what pleases you and what gives you that fulfillment and that happiness.
Okay, so, but I mean, you think we haven't got a lot of people like you, that think, okay, my history bajana hai. Most people aren't, that's not a profession that they're looking for. So, I mean, if someone hasn't got passion, we're not going to get many Sikhs historians, are we?
No, but I'm sure that there are many out there who are just as passionate as I am. and I hope that the message that we give out, that people do follow in our footsteps, you know, and follow that passion, because it's a wonderful passion.
Yes, no, I can see that. Your house is filled with goodies, shall I say, including the ceiling. So
That's my wife's contribution, actually. So she's the artist in the house.
Right,
So
right.
she's always keeping herself busy.
No, it's beautifully decorated. So, I mean, we've come nearly to the end of our interview. So, is there any last words you'd like to share with the Sikh channel viewers?
I'm grateful for the Sikh channel for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that I can give more work to show on Sikh channel, and I hope the viewers get a chance to see the work we're doing. We've got some fantastic new projects coming up. There's got this Burma film coming up, and I thank you for allowing me this time and opportunity.
No, so I want to thank Bobby for allowing us to come to his house, interview him here, and I hope that his Burmese film and other festivals that he's doing go well as his new book that will be released. So with that, let's do Fateh Sanji, and I wish you the best in the future. Thank you. Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.